The woman came out of the snowstorm like a ghost made of ice. She appeared at the edge of the firelight so suddenly that the mountain man reached for his rifle before he saw what she was. Not a bear, not a wolf, not a Blackfoot raider, but a woman. Standing in knee-deep snow at the tree line, wearing a dress so thin the wind went through it like it wasn't there. No coat, no boots. Her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had soaked through hours ago. Her arms held something against her chest, a bundle, small, wrapped in what looked like a flour sack. She was shaking so hard, her teeth made a sound like pebbles rattling in a tin cup. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her lips were blue. She was dying. Not a figure of speech, literally. Standing upright and dying the way people die in Montana Territory winters, on their feet, 1 degree at a time, until the legs give out and the snow covers them, and spring finds what's left. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, back to the story. The mountain man's name was Jedediah Cask. He was 41 years old, built like something the Bitterroots had grown instead of born. Barrel-chested, thick-armed, with a beard the color of rusted iron that reached his sternum, and hands so large they made a Hawken rifle look like a toy. He'd been living alone in the Bitterroot Mountains since 1872. 11 years. Before that, he'd been a different man in a different life in the Gallatin Valley, with a different name he no longer answered to. He had a cabin 2 miles upslope near the headwaters of the West Fork, where the Bitterroot River was still narrow enough to step across. He was camped here tonight because he'd been checking his trap line. Beaver, mostly, some fox and marten, and the storm had come faster than expected. December storms in the Bitterroots don't announce themselves the way plains storms do. They drop from the peaks like a curtain falling. 1 hour you can see 30 miles. The next hour you can't see your hand. His fire was small, just enough to keep alive through the night. Pine and deadfall. He hadn't planned for company. He hadn't had company in 4 years. The woman looked at him. He looked at her. The firelight made her face orange on one side and shadow on the other. She was young, maybe 23, maybe younger, hard to tell with the cold pulling her skin tight against her bones. Brown hair matted and frozen against her skull. Dark eyes too large for her face. The way eyes get large when the body is shutting down and the pupils dilate trying to hold on to consciousness. The Bitterroots did this to people every winter. Settlers from the valley towns, Stevensville, Darby, the little camps along the river, wandered into the high country unprepared, and the mountains killed them without malice. Just cold, just altitude, just the specific indifference of a landscape that was here before humans and would be here after. She opened her cracked blue lips and said 7 words that Jedediah Cask would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. "May I warm myself by your fire?" Any decent man would have said yes. Any man with a pulse and a conscience and the basic human understanding that a person freezing to death in front of you is a person you help. And Jedediah Cask, the man who hadn't spoken to another human since a flathead trader stopped at his cabin for water in the summer of 1879, looked at this freezing, shaking, barely alive woman and said, "No." The woman stared at him. The fire crackled. Snow fell so thick and fast it looked like the sky was coming apart, and the bundle against her chest moved. Not wind, not a shift of cloth. Movement. The movement of something alive inside. The flour sack. Something small. The woman saw him notice. Her arms tightened. Her dark eyes dilated, desperate, dying, changed. The desperation didn't leave, but something joined it, the fierce animal alertness of a creature protecting its young. "Then let my baby warm herself," she whispered. "I'll stand in the snow. Just let her near the fire. Please. She's 3 months old. She won't survive till morning." And Jedediah Cask, who had said no to a dying woman, heard, faint, muffled, barely louder than the wind, a baby crying. The sound reached through 11 years of silence and solitude and sealed doors. It reached into the place he'd been trying to kill since 1872, the place that had held a 3-year-old daughter while she stopped breathing, and the place, despite everything he'd done to bury it, was still alive. Jedediah Cask had not always been a man who said no to dying women. 11 years ago, he'd been a man who said yes to everything. Yes to his wife, Emmeline. Yes to his daughter Pearl. Yes to the small farm in the Gallatin Valley, where they raised chickens and potatoes, and the kind of happiness that doesn't know it's fragile until it shatters. The Gallatin Valley in the early 1870s was filling up with settlers, families coming west on the promise of land and the assurance of the Homestead Act that 160 acres could be yours if you worked it for 5 years. Jedediah and Emmeline had come from Ohio in 1868 with 2 trunks and a milk cow, and the specific optimism of young married people who believe that distance solves problems. Their farm was 80 acres of dark bottomland near the Madison Fork. Emmeline had brown hair and a laugh that sounded like water over rocks. Pearl was 3 years old and called him Papa Bear because of his size and his beard. They were his entire world, compressed into 2 people and a chicken coop. The diphtheria came in the winter of 1872. It moved through the Gallatin Valley the way fire moves through dry grass, silent until it's everywhere. Diphtheria was the great terror of the frontier. It took children first because their throats were smaller and the gray membrane that grew across the airway closed faster. Doctors in the territory had no antitoxin. That wouldn't exist for another 20 years. All they could do was watch and hope and hold the children while the membrane thickened and the breathing slowed and the small bodies fought a battle the centuries' medicine couldn't help them win. Pearl got sick on a Monday. By Tuesday, she couldn't swallow. By Wednesday, the gray membrane was visible in her throat. Emmeline got sick that same day. Jedediah carried them both through snow to the doctor in Bozeman, 12 miles on foot because the horse had gone lame. The doctor did what he could. It wasn't enough. Pearl died Saturday morning in Jedediah's arms. He'd been singing the song Emmeline always sang to put her to sleep. Shenandoah, the river song, the one about longing and distance and things you can't get back. He was still singing when the breathing stopped. He didn't stop singing for a long time after. Emmeline died Monday. The membrane had closed her throat to a pinhole. She held his hand and said, "Take care of our girl," because the fever had stolen the last 2 days from her mind, and she didn't know Pearl was already gone. Jedediah held her hand and said, "I will." The last lie he ever told, the kindest one. He buried them both on the hill behind the farm. 2 small graves, 2 wooden crosses, the frozen ground so hard he broke 2 shovels digging. He stood between the crosses and something inside him, the part that said yes to people, the part that believed in hearths and chicken coops, and the fundamental goodness of a world where Shenandoah existed. That part died standing between those graves. He sold the farm to a family named Tate for $40, a fraction of its worth, because the number didn't matter. Nothing inside the fence mattered anymore. He walked into the Bitterroot Mountains and didn't come back. The Bitterroots were the right place for a man who wanted to disappear. Sergeant Patrick Gass of the Lewis and Clark expedition had called them the most terrible mountains I ever beheld. And that was in September, not December. The peaks rose to 9,000 feet. The canyons were deep enough to lose sunlight by mid-afternoon. Snow came in October and stayed until May. Wolves, grizzlies, mountain lions. A man alone up here could die in 100 ways, and nobody would find the body until the snow melted, and maybe not even then. Jedediah built his cabin at 7,000 feet, near a beaver pond on the West Fork. He trapped beaver and fox and marten. He traded furs once a year at Fort Owen, the old trading post near Stevensville that still operated as a supply point for the scattered settlers and remaining Salish people in the valley. He spoke to nobody. He needed nobody. He'd learned the only lesson the mountains teach. If you need nothing, nothing can be taken from you. And for 11 years, nothing was taken. Until a woman with a baby walked out of a December storm and asked to warm herself by his fire. And the sound of the baby crying reached the part of him that had held Pearl while she stopped breathing. The part he'd buried on a hill in the Gallatin Valley. The part that was, despite every year of silence and every mile of mountain between here and those two crosses, still alive. He said no. Then the baby cried. Then something in his chest cracked like river ice in March, not breaking completely, but fracturing enough that what was underneath started leaking through. "The baby," he said. His voice was rough, unused, a rusted hinge being forced open after years of nothing passing through. "Bring the baby to the fire. You stay at the edge." Not kindness. Negotiation. A compromise between the man who said no and the thing inside, him that heard a 3-month-old crying in a snowstorm and couldn't bear it. The woman stumbled forward. She knelt at the fire and unwrapped the bundle with fingers so frozen they moved like wood. The baby was small, tiny, a girl wrapped in a flour sack lined with a cut-up wool blanket, red-faced from crying. Alive. The woman held the baby near the fire. The heat reached the child and the crying slowed, then stopped. The baby's eyes, dark, enormous, unfocused, reflected the firelight like 2 small mirrors. Jedediah watched from across the fire. His rifle was still in his hands, not aimed, just held. The way a man holds the only barrier between himself and the thing he's afraid of. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice barely there. A thread pulled through a needle. "I said the baby, not you." "I know. Thank you for her." She didn't argue. She didn't beg for herself. She held the baby near the warmth, and her own body shook with cold that would kill her by dawn if she didn't get warm. She accepted this, because the baby was warm. And a mother who has gotten her child to a fire has done the only thing that matters. Jedediah watched her shake. The negotiation continued, the sealed door rattling, the thing behind it pushing. He lasted 4 minutes. Then he took off his elkskin coat, heavy, lined with rabbit fur, the warmest garment in the Bitterroots, and threw it across the fire. It landed at her knees. "Put it on, before you freeze, and I'm stuck with a baby I didn't ask for." The coat swallowed her. She was small. The coat made her look like a child wearing her father's clothes. The shaking slowed. The baby slept. 2 strangers sat in a snowstorm with a rifle and a silence between them that was not comfortable but was survivable. "What's your name?" He didn't want to know, but the baby had changed the equation. "Nessa," she said. "Nessa Drummond." "Where did you come from?" "Grantsdale, 14 miles east. Jedediah knew Grantsdale, a small settlement on the east side of the Bitterroot River, south of Stevensville. Mining families mostly. Men who'd come for the silver strikes that had been disappointing the territory since the 1860s. Hard men in hard camps with hard winters and no law closer than the county seat in Missoula, 60 miles north. 14 miles, on foot, in this storm, with a baby. Yes. Why? The answer came not in words, but in the way her hand moved to her collarbone. She pulled the thin dress aside, just barely, just enough. And in the firelight, Jedediah saw the bruise. Not one bruise, a necklace of bruises, purple and black, circling her throat, finger marks, the specific pattern of a hand that had wrapped around a woman's neck and squeezed. Jedediah stared at the bruised necklace. His grip on the rifle shifted, not toward her, toward the dark beyond the firelight, toward whatever had made those marks. "My husband," Nessa said. "Arlo." One name, 2 syllables, spoken like a knife laid on a table. And the 14-mile walk through a December blizzard with a baby and no boots suddenly made complete sense. Because frontier women knew something that history books don't always tell. The law in Montana Territory belonged to men. Wives were property in every way that mattered. A woman couldn't own land separately from her husband, couldn't testify against him in most courts, couldn't get a divorce without proving cruelty so extreme that the judge, always a man, deemed it worse than the scandal of a broken marriage. And the nearest judge was in Missoula, 60 miles, through mountains, in December. For a woman with finger bruises on her throat and a 3-month-old baby, the mountains were easier than the courthouse. The storm was easier than the law. The fire of a stranger was safer than the home of a husband. Nessa chose the Bitterroots, and the Bitterroots, in the form of a man who hadn't spoken in 4 years, gave her his coat. He didn't plan to bring her to, 1, the cabin. The plan was the fire. Survive the night. Morning comes, point her toward Stevensville, the oldest settlement in Montana, founded as St. Mary's Mission in 1841, now a small town with a general store and a doctor and at least the structure of civilization. That was the plan. Plans in the Bitterroots last about as long as a match in wind. By midnight, the storm had doubled. Snow came sideways, hissing into the flames. The baby started crying again. Not the hungry cry from before, but the high, thin cry of a body losing heat. Jedediah knew that sound. He'd heard it from lambs in spring storms. It was the cry before the quiet, and the quiet was death. He stood. "Get up, we're going to the cabin." Nessa looked at him. Her dark eyes calculated. The fast, invisible math that women do when a man they don't know tells them to follow him somewhere private. Is this man more dangerous than the storm? Jedediah saw the calculation happening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I haven't spoken to a person in 4 years. I didn't say yes to you at the fire. I'm not a man who wants company. But that baby is going to die out here, and I've already watched 1 child die in my arms, and I am not doing it again. So get up." The most words he'd spoken since 1879. His voice cracked on, again. Nessa heard the crack. She got up. The walk to the cabin was 2 miles through snow that was now waist deep. The Bitterroot Range to the west was invisible, just a wall of white noise and falling sky. Jedediah broke trail. Nessa followed in his path, the baby inside his elkskin coat against her chest, only the baby's face visible in the collar opening. The cold was the kind that doesn't bite. It swallows. The kind that Lewis and Clark's men had described in their journals when they crossed these same mountains in 1805, and Clark wrote, I have been wet and as cold in every part as I ever was in my life. That was September. This was December. Twice Nessa stumbled and Jedediah caught her, once by the arm, once around the waist. And both times she flinched at his touch, and both times he let go immediately. He noticed the flinches, filed them the way he filed animal tracks, information about what a creature has experienced and what it expects. A woman who flinches at being caught when she's falling has been grabbed by hands that didn't let go. The cabin was small. One room, stone fireplace, a cot with elk hides, a table, 2 chairs. He'd built 2 chairs because the wood came in pairs and he hadn't thought about it. Or because some part of him behind the sealed door had built a chair for someone who might come. He didn't examine which. He built a fire so large the stones glowed orange. The cabin heated fast. The logs were tight, the chinking good. Nessa sat in the chair nearest the fire with the baby and the elkskin coat. The shaking stopped. Color returned. Pink replacing blue. The baby slept. And Jedediah sat in the second chair and watched them with the expression of a man who has lost an argument with himself and doesn't yet know the cost. But the cost was coming. Because 14 miles east in Grantsdale, a man named Arlo Drummond was waking up to an empty bed and an empty cradle. And Arlo Drummond was not the kind of man who lets things he considers his walk away. Not in a territory where the law agreed with him. Not when the nearest sheriff was in Missoula and the passes were snowed in, and a man with a rifle and a grievance could ride wherever he pleased without anyone knowing or caring or stopping him. She stayed 3 days, then 5, then 7. The storm lasted 4 days, a monster that buried the bitterroots in 6 feet of snow and made the passes impassable. Jedediah had seen storms like this before. The territory had been hit hard in the winters of the early 1880s, building toward what the ranchers in the valleys below would later call the Big Die-Up of 1886 to 87, when hundreds of thousands of cattle froze on the open range and the era of unfenced ranching ended. The mountains felt it first. The mountains always feel it first. After the storm, the passes were blocked. After the passes cleared, the trails were dangerous with avalanche. After the trails were safe, well, by then 7 days had passed and Jedediah Cask had discovered something terrible. He didn't want her to leave. It was the baby. The baby destroyed him. Her name was Wren, 3 months old, dark-eyed like her mother, with a tuft of black hair and a cry that could penetrate stone walls and sealed doors and 11 years of deliberate emptiness. Jedediah held her on the 3rd day, not voluntarily. Nessa needed both hands to cook. She'd taken over the cooking without asking, the quiet negotiation of usefulness that frontier women understood instinctively. Make yourself necessary, and you earn the right to stay. And the baby was fussing, and Nessa said, "Hold her." And before Jedediah could refuse, Wren was in his arms. She weighed nothing, less than a trapped fox. But the weight of her, the warmth, the smallness, the way her unfocused eyes found his face and her mouth made an O shape of curiosity, was the heaviest thing he'd held in 11 years. His enormous, trap-scarred hands cupped her entire body. She fit in his palms the way a bird fits in a nest, and the sealed door didn't crack. It blew open. Pearl's face, Emmeline's laugh. Shenandoah. Everything behind the door rushed through him, and his eyes burned, and his throat closed, and his hands gripped the baby tighter. Not dangerously. Desperately. The grip of a man holding something he'd spent 11 years pretending he didn't need. Nessa watched him hold Wren. She said nothing, but her dark eyes saw what was happening the way a person who has survived a storm can see another person's storm. She recognized the damage because she carried her own. That night, after Wren slept in a drawer Jedediah had lined with fox fur, Nessa told him about Arlo, not because he asked, because the fire was warm and the baby was safe, and the silence between them had become the kind that invites truth. Arlo Drummond had come to Grantsdale from Virginia City in 1880. One of the mining men who drifted between the territories played out silver camps looking for the next strike. Charming when sober, violent when drunk, and drunk more often than not since the Grantsdale mine cut wages in the spring. The bruise necklace was the latest. There had been others: cracked rib, broken finger, a burn on her forearm from a stove door he'd shoved her into. She'd stayed because Grantsdale was all she had. No family west of the Missouri, no money except what Arlo controlled, nowhere to go in a territory where a woman without a husband was a woman without legal standing. Then Wren was born, and the first time Arlo raised his hand with the baby in the room, not at the baby, near the baby, close enough for the wind of the swing to touch the baby's face. Nessa made her decision. She waited for the storm. She wrapped her daughter in a flour sack. She walked 14 miles through the worst December blizzard the Bitterroot had seen in 5 years. And the mountains. Those terrible mountains that Sergeant Gass had beheld and Lewis and Clark had nearly died crossing. The mountains caught her, held her, delivered her to a fire where a man who hadn't spoken in 4 years gave her his coat. But here's the thing nobody in that cabin knew. The passes wouldn't stay closed forever. The snow would melt. And Arlo Drummond was already looking. On the 14th day, Jedediah saw the tracks. He was checking his trap line a half-mile south of the cabin when he found them. Boot prints in the melting snow. Fresh, heavy. A man walking with purpose, not wandering. The tracks came from the east, from the direction of Grantsdale and the Bitterroot River, and they were heading directly toward the cabin. Jedediah knelt beside the prints. His fingers traced the boot heel, deep, the print of a large man. The stride was long and even, not hurried, the walk of a man who knows where he's going. Jedediah's blood went cold in a way 11 Montana winters hadn't managed. He ran. Something he hadn't done in years. Crashing through snow, up the slope, breath exploding white. He reached the cabin and found Nessa in the doorway with Wren in her arms and a face the color of the snow behind her. She'd seen him too. The man was standing at the tree line, 50 yards from the cabin, motionless, watching. Tall, wide-shouldered, dark coat, dark hat, a face that even at 50 yards radiated something that made the air thin. Not anger exactly. Ownership. The specific posture of a man looking at a building that contains things he considers his. "Get inside," Jedediah said. Nessa didn't move. Frozen, not from cold, but from the specific paralysis of seeing the thing you ran from standing in the place you ran to. 14 miles wasn't enough. The mountains weren't enough. Nothing was enough. Nessa, inside, now. She moved. She took Wren inside. The bar dropped, the heavy wooden bar he'd built to keep bears out, now keeping something worse out. Jedediah walked toward the tree line. His rifle was in the cabin. He was unarmed. He walked with nothing but his body and his size, and the specific absence of fear that belongs to a man who has already lost everything once and knows exactly what it costs. Up close, Arlo Drummond was what Jedediah expected. Big, hard-faced, handsome in the ruined way of a man whose looks had been used as camouflage for something rotten. Blue eyes, blonde hair, jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped, the smell of whiskey even in the cold. "That's my wife in there," Arlo said, "and my daughter." Controlled, pleasant, the charming voice. "There's a woman in my cabin," Jedediah said. "She walked 14 miles through a blizzard with a baby rather than spend one more night with you. Think about what that means. She's confused. She's sick. She doesn't know what she's—" The bruises on her neck? Did she confuse those too? Arlo's pleasant voice dropped. What was underneath was gravel and iron and entitlement. The specific entitlement of a man who has never been told no by anything he considers his. Jedediah had seen it in animals. The bull that charges anything in its territory because it has never been challenged. The difference is that bulls don't own wives under territorial law. "I'm taking them home," Arlo said. No. The same word he'd said to Nessa at the fire, but this no meant something completely different. The first was a door closing. This was a wall being built. "You're standing on my land, my mountain, my trees. You've got 60 seconds to turn around." "You're threatening me?" "I'm informing you. I've lived on this mountain 11 years. I know every canyon, every cave, every trail. I've buried a wife and a daughter in ground so hard it broke 2 shovels. The strength in these hands comes from carrying grief you cannot imagine. And you, a man who makes grief. You want to test me?" The 2 men stood in the snow while 50 yards away a woman held a baby behind a barred door and listened to 2 voices carrying through the logs and couldn't hear the words but could hear the tones. One controlled and charming. One rusted and absolute. And she knew which one she was afraid of, and which one she trusted. Arlo didn't leave. Jedediah didn't expect him to. Men who strangle their wives don't walk away because a stranger says 60 seconds. Arlo reached into his coat. "I've got a legal claim," he said. "She's my wife. The baby is mine. Territorial law says. The law is in Missoula, 60 miles and 3 mountain passes away. We're on the Bitterroot, and the mountain doesn't read." Arlo took a step forward. Jedediah didn't step back. 3 feet between them. Close enough to smell whiskey. Close enough to see the violence behind Arlo's eyes like a loaded gun waiting for a finger. "I don't want trouble," Arlo said. The charming voice. The voice that comes before the hand. "I just want my family back." A man who wants his family doesn't put his fingers around their mother's neck. The mask slipped. The same way Parnell's smile had dropped. The same way Clive's charm had fallen. The specific moment when a man who uses pleasantness as camouflage realizes the camouflage isn't working. "You don't know what she told you. She lies. She's unstable. She walked 14 miles in a blizzard with a 3-month-old baby." Jedediah's voice was flat. The voice of the mountain itself. Nobody walks 14 miles through a December storm because they're confused. They walk 14 miles because the house is worse than the storm. And a man who is the reason a woman chooses a blizzard over a bed is not a man I'm returning a baby to. Arlo's hand moved. Not to a weapon. To a fist. The swing came fast. Jedediah caught it. Caught it in his hand. Closed his massive trap-scarred hand around Arlo's fist and held it motionless in the air between them. Arlo's eyes went wide. He was strong. Used to being the strongest man in any room. But he had never hit a mountain before. Jedediah Kask, who had spent 11 years chopping wood and hauling traps and breaking ice on frozen beaver ponds and carrying the weight of 2 graves every waking hour, had hands that could crush stone. He didn't squeeze. He held. "I've buried a wife and a daughter," Jedediah said. Quiet. Close. "The pain of that lives in these hands. Every day. And you, a man who creates the pain I carry, you want to swing at me?" He opened his hand. Arlo's fist dropped. "Walk down this mountain. Go to Grantsdale. Go to Missoula. File whatever paper you want. Send whatever sheriff you can find. By the time anyone reaches this cabin, that woman and that baby will be somewhere in these mountains you will never find, because the Bitterroots have been hiding people since before Lewis and Clark came through, and I know them better than any man alive." Arlo stared. Whatever he saw in Jedediah's eyes, the graves, the grief, the 11 years sharpened into something that looked more like a weapon than a wound, made him step back, then another step. He turned. He walked east, down the slope, through the snow, and Jedediah watched him go until the dark coat was a speck on the white landscape, and then nothing. Gone. The way the mountain erases things that don't belong. He walked back to the cabin. He knocked, because barging through a barred door is what Arlo would do, and Jedediah would never do what Arlo would do. The bar lifted. The door opened. Nessa stood there with Wren against her chest, and dark eyes searching his face. "He's gone. Will he come back? Not to this mountain, not while I'm on it. And if he sends the law? The law won't climb 7,000 feet in December for one woman, and a baby. And by spring." He stopped. By spring was a sentence about the future, and the future was a door he hadn't opened in 11 years. Nessa looked at him the way a person looks at a fire they've been warming themselves by for 14 days and realizes the fire isn't just warmth. "You said no to me," she whispered. "That first night, you said no." "I did." "Why?" He was quiet. Wren fussed in her arms. The fire crackled. Snow fell outside. The Bitterroots held their breath the way mountains hold their breath, with patience and no hurry. "Because the last time I said yes to someone," Jedediah said, "I lost everything. Pearl, Emmeline, the farm. I walked away from 2 graves and came up here and sealed myself shut like a cabin in winter. And for 11 years I told myself that was living. That quiet was enough. That needing nothing was freedom." He paused. "Then you walked out of a storm with a baby and asked to warm yourself by my fire. And the baby cried. And the sound of her crying reached a place I'd been trying to kill for 11 years. The place that held Pearl while she stopped breathing. And the place was still alive. And I said no because saying yes meant opening the door. And the last time that door was open, everything I loved walked through it and died." His voice was rough, broken open. The voice of a man who has just described the architecture of his own isolation to the woman sitting inside it. "And now?" Nessa asked. "Now I have something to lose again." It wasn't a love confession. It was a fact. The way a mountain man states facts, without decoration. The way a man says, "The river is rising," or "The storm is coming." A fact about the geography of his own chest. He had something to lose, and having something to lose, after 11 years of having nothing, was the most terrifying and the most human thing that had happened to him since the day he walked away from 2 small crosses on a hill in the Gallatin Valley. Nessa didn't speak. She stepped aside and let him into the cabin. His cabin, which was now, in every way that mattered, theirs. She set Wren in the fox fur drawer and poured coffee and placed a cup beside the chair he'd built. The second chair, the one he'd built without knowing why he'd built 2. He sat. She sat. 2 chairs, 2 cups, 1 fire. And outside, the Bitterroots stood. The terrible mountains, the most terrible ever beheld, holding 2 people and a baby the way mountains hold everything, without judgment, without condition, without caring whether any of it makes sense. The mountain doesn't care about love or law or the bruises on a woman's neck. The mountain cares about one thing: survival. And the three people in the cabin, the man who said no and then said yes, the woman who walked 14 miles through a blizzard with a baby, and the baby who cried loud enough to open a door that had been sealed for 11 years, were surviving. Together. Which is the only way surviving is worth doing. The passes would open in spring. The law might come. Arlo might send men. The territory might demand that a woman named Nessa Drummond return to the husband whose fingers had left bruises on her throat. But spring was 5 months away, and 5 months in the Bitterroots is a lifetime. And a man who knows every canyon and cave and trail, a man whose grief has made him strong enough to catch another man's fist in the air and hold it still, is a man the mountain recognizes, and the mountain protects its own. And the second chair, the one he'd built without knowing why, finally had someone sitting in it. And the fire she'd asked to warm herself by, the fire he'd said no to, the fire that had melted something in his chest that 11 years of winter hadn't been able to freeze permanently, burned all night. Not because the cold required it, because the warmth did. If this story stayed with you, if the second chair, or the elk skin coat across the fire, or the song called Shenandoah is sitting in your chest right now, leave a like and subscribe to Wild West Talehouse. The frontier has more stories, and the best ones are about the people who said no, and then slowly, painfully, beautifully, learn to say yes again.